Well, thanks for coming, everybody. Happy to have you all here. I'm Pam Roach. I'm the Acting Scientific Director of the O'Brien Institute. I'm really grateful to have the Knowledge Impact team joining us today to talk about the Knowledge Engagement Impact Assessment Toolkit. This is really important. We're sort of integrating this in our reporting for the Healthier Populations Catalyst Grant. So wanted to provide some information for people who might want to complete the toolkit, and we just think it's a really great tool. Would encourage lots of people to try implementing using it. So joining us today is Stephanie Warner. Stephanie is the manager of the Knowledge to Impact team in research services at the University of Calgary, found on main campus. The portfolio provides support for community engaged research, knowledge mobilization, responsible research assessment, research impact, and open science. And joining Stephanie is Sarelle Azuelos, who is the partnership and knowledge mobilization specialist. And facilitates research partnerships between the University of Calgary and community organizations while building capacity and partnership best practices. Sarelle also supports faculty in knowledge mobilization, planning, and strategizing. So joining in welcoming Stephanie and Sarelle. So let's just dive right into things today.
And I'll just say as well, like, thank you for having us. If at any time you can't hear my voice or folks online can't pick it up, wave and I'll try to remember to raise that back up. So, how do we start today? We wanted to start in a good way with the land acknowledgement. So I'll share this with everyone. I would like to acknowledge and pay tribute to the traditional territories of the peoples of K7, located in the heart of southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nation. The City of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. So who are we? Pam gave us a great introduction, so thank you for that. A little bit more context about myself. I joined the university about 2 years ago now. And prior to that, I was working primarily. I worked primarily in community in and around Calgary. So worked with a couple of nonprofits in a communications role and a community engagement role. And that's often the lens that I try to bring to this work as well when I'm talking about partnership matchmaking and those best practices. What does it mean to be a community organization working in this space who has a research question, an idea, and would like to collaborate?
And I've been at the university for about 10 years now. I started as a postdoc when I was a bench scientist. I've since moved into career advising for PhD students for about 5 years. And for the last now 3.5 years as well, I've been with the Knowledge to Impact team, previously called the Knowledge Engagement team, which is why our toolkit is called the Knowledge Engagement Impact Assessment Toolkit. And really, I think what I value about this team coming from my previous experience is that a lot of my previous work and interest was about how do we tell the stories of research? How do we connect it to what's important in society? How do we support scholars to both plan for impact, to achieve impact, but to do that in a good way? And what tools and resources can we support scholars to do that, or to make that a little bit easier? So that's why I'm so pleased to be here with you today.
So what are we covering today? We'll start off with a brief overview of what the Knowledge to Impact team does. Then we'll go into some definitions and what it means from our perspective to do research, measure research impact, with your knowledge engagement well. Then of course, we'll be talking about how do we assess research impact, and we'll walk through the toolkit, which is in front of you on the tables. There's also some spare ones here by the coffee station. So if you want an extra copy on your way out, please feel free to grab that. And for the folks online, if you don't have those open, I would recommend just opening them up in the next couple of minutes. We'll go through a bit more of a how-to line by line in the second half of this presentation, but it can be handy to have one in front of you. And then of course, questions, lots of time for questions. Our knowledge to impact team, we keep growing. It's been very exciting over the last 2 years to see these new faces join us. At its core, the knowledge to impact team supports collaborative efforts to maximize and recognize the positive impacts of research for the benefit of our local, national, and international communities. What does that mean in practice? Most of our work falls under these 3 different buckets or 3 different core areas of work. Myself, I'm, as mentioned, working on knowledge mobilization capacity building to do one-on-one consults with researchers about their knowledge mobilization plans. And then this partnership matchmaking piece, which is becoming more and more critical in this role, of course. And from that perspective, how do we hear from community organizations about their needs, their ideas, their questions, and find appropriate matches here on campus? My coworkers are working on something called DORA, or the Declaration of Research Assessment. And so they're promoting and integrating better practices across campus for how we measure impact, which Steph sort of mentioned at the very beginning here. And then last but not least, we have Ottilia, and she's working on the implementation of an open science strategy for the institution as a whole. So she has a community that she's growing online, a newsletter, lots of different resources that we're collecting right now. So if you'd like to learn more about any of these, at the bottom, and we'll share the slides afterwards. So, what is research impact? Got a few different definitions that we tend to lean on with the team here. This one is nice, it's quick, it's short, easy to understand. And so it says the provable effects, benefits of research in the real world. And this is from Julie Bailey at the University of Lincoln. Another one that we tend to use quite a lot of course is from SSHRC. And so they describe research impact as the long-term outcomes or effects that take the form of changed thinking and behaviors. So again, we're thinking about what comes from a research project, what comes from partnership, and then how are we measuring or understanding the impacts further down the road. And last but not least is one from Research Impact Canada. And it reads, impact is defined as an effect on, change, or benefit to the economy, society, culture, public policy or services, health, the environment, or quality of life beyond academia. So there's quite a broad spectrum that we can consider when we're trying to think about how we're measuring research impact. What is knowledge engagement? So this is again something that came from an advisory committee on knowledge engagement here at the UC. And it was the result of a lot of consultation and thinking with researchers and with faculty members and leadership to try and come down with this definition. And it reads, knowledge engagement is a dynamic reciprocal process in which multiple parties come together to address mutually identified problems. The purpose of this deliberate engagement is for the co-creation, synthesis, and application of knowledge and evidence for the benefit of the community at large. So again, you can kind of see in those definitions of impact and here in the definition of knowledge engagement, the community at large, the world outside of academia is a crucial part of our understanding of research impact. And while, as mentioned, our team name has changed from knowledge engagement to knowledge to impact to better encapsulate all the different kinds of work that we're doing. This toolkit is still called engagement because that's so critical to the structure and the purpose of what it's trying to capture. I'll pass this over. Thanks.
I usually like to walk around, but we're going to stick with the podium for the owl, for the owl's benefit. So we're talking today about a toolkit that is to help assess the impact of these types of engaged scholarship or engaged projects. But I just wanted to briefly mention some of the reasons why we might assess research impact. So in some cases, it might be for advocacy to make the case for research. It might be about accountability. So it might be accountability to your funder or to your institute who has provided a Catalyst grant, for example. It could be about analysis, which means analyzing kind of how things went and how it could potentially be improved in future. Could be for allocation reasons. So you might do an impact analysis to decide how to allocate resources like funding or personnel, for example.
Two that were added later, they were originally the 4 A's of impact assessment. Now it's the 6 A's, and I think maybe there's 7 now, but I'm going to stick with the 6. A claim could be to compare and to recognize value, and adaptation could be to steer change. So as you're completing any kind of assessment of the benefit that you've added in the world, I would encourage you to think about the purpose of the assessment. Who is it for? Who's the audience? Why are you reporting on this? And really, what's the purpose of it? What's the story you're trying to tell? I'm also going to show this because we've been talking quite a bit about impact, and we like to make sure we're kind of on the same page. There's lots of different ways to think about how impact might be achieved. Pathways to impact is a really common way to think about it. And part of the reason that this toolkit came about is that a lot of traditional academic assessment was focusing on certain types of research outputs, but it wasn't really capturing the whole breadth of research outputs that might be possible, nor the difference that those outputs or activities might make downstream. So really, when we think about pathways to impact, we sort of think about our inputs, what went into the project. That could be time and resources like funding, people, infrastructure. What was the research process or activities that were carried out? So was that community engagement, collaborations, new methods? What did you actually do during this project? Outputs is where we often think of is, what was produced as a result of this research. So we often think of publications, was it data sets, what might it be? And really importantly, in engaged scholarship, are there other types of outputs that might have been relevant to community partners or to people involved in the research? So really thinking about what types of outputs might be relevant and making sure that you have a space to kind of tell the story of all of the things that came out of the research. Outcomes is the next level of this. A lot of times during assessments in the academic realm, we tend to stop at outputs. We published a paper at the end. Really, that's partway through the journey. So what are the outcomes of that? How has that research been taken up and used, and by whom? Did this lead to things like new policies, new practices? What's that kind of usage of the research? And then the impacts, as Sarelle mentioned, there's often those longer term effects. It could be things like increased quality of life or well-being or other aspects of impacts. For many of us, we don't always make it to the very end of achieving like capital I impact, and that is totally okay. That's why we think about this pathway to impact approach to say, what have I done? What's my research story? And how am I moving towards impact in an intentional way? So the Knowledge Engagement Impact Assessment Toolkit was a project that was launched in 2020 and funded by the Future Skills Centre through a Research Impact Canada grant. Research Impact Canada is a national organization that the University of Calgary is a member of. And the reason that this project was taken up, there were a couple of needs assessments conducted in 2014 and in 2020 here at the University of Calgary. And folks found that engaged scholarship or knowledge engagement work comes with unique challenges. And one of those unique challenges was a lack of or inconsistent recognition. Has anyone kind of filled out an application for something and they've asked for, a list of your publications and awards and your traditional CV, but maybe they haven't exactly asked about the process by which you did that, or how much time it took to get to a publication, or who else was involved? Or if you're working in a co-creative way, how is that captured? So that was a really common thing that came up in these needs assessments. And the Knowledge Engagement Implementation Committee recommended developing a framework for faculty members to evaluate their own projects. And it provides a tangible structure that you could use in a variety of different spaces, places like tenure and promotion, but also in any other kind of assessment you might do. There were a number of different priorities. We've taken those out of the presentation. We didn't think you'd be super keen to see the whole list of priorities, but know that there were a list of priorities for how measurement should be done and considerations that have now been incorporated into the toolkit. It should be attentive to things like short-term, mid-term, and long-term impacts. And most importantly, it really needs to emphasize community priorities. And in this case, you might use community to mean any kind of partner that you're working with or any kind of audience that you're working with. But
the emphasizing the people outside of academia are central to this. So this toolkit was developed in 2020, and it was actually recently published in French as well, and some of our colleagues at French institutions are using that as well. And Dr. Roach as well is conducting a research study on the toolkit itself. So very open to feedback on this, how it might work, and we're hoping that her work will also lead to kind of a version 2.0 of this. Is there anything you want to add?
I was gonna say, I'll do a quick plug that if you take a look at the toolkit, even if you haven't used it, let me know, and maybe we can send out a little follow-up, because we are still recruiting people who might want to have a conversation with us about the use of it and what they think might be improved. So still recruiting and doing data collection for that. So that's an interview, so nothing too onerous, but would appreciate all feedback.
So what is this toolkit itself? So the components of it are in front of you if you're in the room, and if you're online, it is downloadable from the KE Toolkit website. So it has a couple of pieces or components to it. There's a matrix, which is an Excel-based document. It's a colorful sheet that you'll see that is more of a quantitative approach to assessing these different indicators, which we'll go through in more detail in a moment. There's a number of different impact indicators related to a framework called REAP, which I will introduce in the next slide, and leave space for strategic context. So how to align this with kind of your strategic context, meaning institutional priorities or institute priorities or community partner priorities. The matrices and the toolkit in general are meant to be used at any stage of a project. So they can be used at the planning stage. They could be used during a project to monitor how things are going. And they could be used at the end of a project to say, how did it go and what could we reflect on? So the matrix has some quantitative components and generates a weighted impact score. The portrait is a Word document that you will download, and it allows you to tell the story of the activity, the initiative, the project, or the program. This comes with a usage guide, because with these two components, it can be difficult to know where to start. So the usage guide is a PDF document. It's the stapled version if you were here in the room, that really walks you through, what the toolkit is, what the different indicators in the framework are, and how to actually use this. Really, the ideal usage for this tool, and it says it at the bottom here, but the assessment should come from a shared space or a community perspective. So we would encourage you to think of this as a conversation or an opportunity for a collaborative discussion about the impact of your project. If you have the capacity with a community partner to sit down and go through some of these questions, that would be amazing. If you are a community partner, we would encourage you to sit down with your research partner to work through this. And really, it's designed as kind of reflective questions that can help you to iteratively work through your project. And it's also adaptable. So there are a few things that we'll point out that are indicators that are locked. So we call those core indicators. They're thought to be central to this framework that was selected for the toolkit. But a lot of it is really adaptable. And honestly, we've generated this to be used by people. So feel free to take it, to pull pieces out of it that you like, to rip it apart, to adapt it however you would like. We really encourage you to play with the toolkit as well. Okay. Did I miss anything on this? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to dig into the framework, and I'm just going to bring up all of these because the animations are a bit off. So there were a number of different considerations, as I mentioned, going into the toolkit, and a lot of different priorities were considered, and a few different frameworks and models were assessed. There was a student who was hired to help develop this. Her name was Gertrude, and she went through and evaluated a number of different frameworks, things like the knowledge to action cycle, a logic model like what I showed previously, the pathways to impact approach, things that are used in the UK, and ultimately they settled on something called REAP, which stands for reciprocity, externalities, access, and partnerships. And this framework is out of the University of Bradford in the United Kingdom, and it's designed as a community engagement framework. So reciprocity is really about the flow of knowledge, information, and benefits in both directions between the university and community partners. And there's, in the matrix, we'll go through this, there's kind of one component to this, but there's a lot to reflect on in a reciprocity story. Externalities or reach is really benefits beyond the partnership. How is this contributing to building social trust, to enhance sustainability, well-being, cohesion? So where has your research got to? What's the reach of it? Access is about how partners may have access to facilities and resources instead of what happens in many engaged spaces is there's sort of a one-off transactional type of engagement. We're really trying to promote more sustained collaborative spaces. So what's the story of ongoing access to knowledge and resources? And partnerships, the goal here is that partnerships deepen and develop through extended reciprocity and improved access. So really, this is a framework that puts the partnership and the engagement center to the assessment. There's quite a bit on this slide. You'll find this as well in the usage guide if you wanted to follow along on your sheet. So reciprocity defined as a mutually beneficial exchange of knowledges and resources. In the matrix portion of this, which is again the Excel, you'll have the option to rate this on a scale of 1 to 5. And in this case, 1 is that there's really just information sharing, so one-way sharing of information to build knowledge, whereas 5 is collaboration. So you're actually developing solutions to mutually identify problems by co-creating, synthesizing, and applying knowledge. So it allows you to really reflect on where are you in this kind of reciprocity and co-creation type of spectrum? Are you more partnering and sharing information out, or are you giving space to co-create and to really build something together? In externalities and reach, there are 3 locked or core indicators. So this you'll be rating again, and again, this is a self-assessment. So rating from 1 to 5, how well your project or initiative promotes engaged research and scholarship, how well it enhances trust by creating shared and ethical spaces, and whether or how much it affects change in the target sector. So again, you can see why it's crucial to sit down with the partner and talk about these things. A lot of assumptions might be made on one side or the other. It could be interesting to have each side of the partnership or each partner fill this out and see where you land. Are you giving the same ratings? Some adaptable or optional indicators could be, is it inclusive of diverse ways of knowing and doing? Does it enable dialogue that engages community? And does it facilitate capacity building of students or trainees or folks in the community organization as well? There are some additional indicators as well that you can add in to the matrix or just to your own reflection. Does this partnership contribute to economic development, community development? Does it increase understanding of critical social issues? And is it responsive to sustainable development goals? So again, these can be adapted based on your unique project context. So you might want to sit down at the beginning and say, what was I hoping to achieve? What kinds of impacts was I hoping my project would have? And then look at these indicators to say, which ones of these really stand out? All of the ones on the left side of the screen here are actually built into the matrix already. It's just that the ones that aren't in bold, you could change them or adapt them if you want to. Whereas these ones are more locked at this point. The top 3 are more locked. So we would really encourage you to use all of those on the left side, and if you want to add extra ones in too. In terms of access, this is a question that I think don't often ask. So I actually really appreciate that it's built into this framework is, who has access and what kind of access to knowledge and resources. So the locked indicator in this one is, does this support ongoing open and accessible access to knowledge? This might be a chance to reflect on how available the research data might be to people involved in the research. It might be about the research outputs. Are they accessible to your partners outside of academia? Who can read them? Who can understand them? Who can even access them? Are they behind a paywall? So this might be a chance to reflect on some of those kind of open science practices as well. Does this take work off campus and into the community? Are you actually getting off campus and working with folks in their space. And does this promote ongoing and shared access to resources? And you'll notice that these first and third bullets are very similar, but knowledge and resources can be seen as different things. So this could also be about, is there physical infrastructure? Are there spaces that community might have access to? Are there resources within your team that maybe they could have ongoing access to? Depending on how you look at this, the ongoing access to knowledge or to resources, you might also think about, do you have, we've seen folks create like a community knowledge hub, for example, where they have a plain English summary of a paper and can provide access to that paper to their community partners. So there's just different ways you could think about how you might increase those aspects. Partnership is about whether this cultivates new partnerships, strengthens existing partnerships, and whether it supports internal collaboration. The strategic context, this slide's a little bit wordy, so I apologize for that. If you look at just the main bullet points here, strategic context is built in here because usually we're doing an assessment or a reflection for a reason and within some sort of context. So this might be a chance for you to say, is this for a funding proposal? Is it for an advocacy purpose? Is this for something in my institution? Is it for something in community? So really reflecting on the context of the partners and the partner organizations as well. So not just the university. So this could be things like the institution's plans, strategies, and priorities. We have a number of strategic plans and priorities at the university that you may fall within. It could be the O'Brien Catalyst Grant areas of focus or priorities. It could be about UCalgary's Ahead of Tomorrow strategy or many of those other institutional pieces. But this might also be about, is this aligning with your partner's strategic priorities or their context? Does their organization have a mission or a vision that this research is contributing to? And can you build that into your reporting and your assessment as well? And it could also be external expectations and commitments like community priorities, external funding, contracts, or even professional expectations in your space. So a couple that come up often at the University of Calgary. So things like the Ahead of Tomorrow strategic plan. Are we harnessing the power of research and innovation to tackle society's biggest challenges? Are we locating community in the center of all that we do? And I would say if you're using this toolkit for engaged scholarship, you are definitely aligning with the institution's strategic plan. And I'm mentioning here as well, Sarelle mentioned DORA, the Declaration on Research Assessment. This is a global declaration towards more responsibly recognizing research and assessing research. So going beyond just, publication metrics or what journal you publish in to say, what is the value of all of your contributions in scholarship? And can we consider a broader range of impact measures? Importantly, the University of Calgary signed DORA in 2021, and most major Canadian funders, including the tri-agencies, also have signed DORA and are adapting a lot of their policies and practices to that. So that might also be, by doing the toolkit in this way, you are also aligning with more holistic and inclusive ways of assessing research. So I just wanted to point those two out as potentials. And I'll pass it to Sarelle and we'll just show a couple of other things and then we'll leave lots of time for questions.
So we'll spend the next few minutes just sort of taking a closer look at the mechanics of this toolkit. How exactly might you think about filling it in and how does it calculate things? So as Steph had mentioned, you can see here, these are going to be some of the bullet points that we went through for reciprocity, externalities, access, partnership. And the ones in bold are the ones that are those core pieces that aren't supposed to be changed. Whereas the ones that are not in bold, mouse. Oh, there we go. Right here are the ones that are more adaptable. And so we can either look at some of the other suggestions that are in the toolkit guide, or you can talk to your community partners or to folks who are also researching this field to think about what are some of the other indicators that you want to consider. Here in the life cycle stage is where you're going to have a drop down menu.
We're not in the interactive
Oh.
version, we're still in the slideshow, sorry.
No, that's okay. There, I have it open, I promise. Okay,
See how well we can navigate on the screen from sideways, so bear with us.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a, yeah, like a dental aptitude test where your 3D spatial reasoning is being tested.
I believe I'm not my strong.
No, me neither.
So yeah, this first column is where you're gonna get the drop-down menu where you can talk about, are you filling this out in your planning stage? Is it somewhere along the process of your research project in the moderating phase? Or are you talking about impact assessment, which tends to happen maybe towards the end, or if this is an ongoing project with multiple stages, and perhaps you're thinking about assessing at specific points along the way. So this will just give you those three options to choose from. And then here in reciprocity, it is also a pretty specific drop-down menu. So again, that 1 to 5 scale that Steph has worked us through, one end being information, which is the sort of one directional sharing of things that you've learned. And on the other end of the spectrum is collaboration. So are you co-creating projects with community partners? Are you thinking together about how you're identifying the research question, maybe even the process and design, and perhaps the analysis of information that you're learning. And then these are the different kinds of categories along the way. And through those conversations, rate them along like 1 through 5. And there's a formula built behind the scenes that's going to tally up this. So if I were to change this to 3, pretend I changed one of these. What should happen is that this will automatically update into a new calculation. And you can go through for multiple initiatives or multiple activities within the same project as well. So if you're co-creating an infographic, then maybe that's one particular activity. If you're recording a podcast with a community partner, perhaps that's a separate line as well. And then you can work your way through these different considerations. Here we have.
The week. I want to mention the week.
Sure.
Yeah, in that yellow row, the factor weighting of relative importance, those core indicators are also locked, but that goes into the calculation of that final impact score. Any of the indicators that aren't locked, you could say that that has more or less weight. They're kind of on a scale of 1 to 5 as well. Right now, most of them are set between 3 and 5 as a relative weighting.
Let me just ask, because there's various, it's kind of interesting, some of them are 5, some of them are 4. Some of them are 3.
Yeah.
For maximum time. May I ask, without diverting this, how was that derived? Where did this come?
Yeah, so I'll just repeat the question. Where did the weighting come from? So I'll answer to the best of my ability based on the project team and the steering group would have, there was a small steering group and they would have decided based on the REAP framework and the priorities of the knowledge engagement implementation committee. They had said, here's the core indicators, they have higher weight. Here's the ones that don't have as high of weight. So what I would say at this stage, the ones that are rated as a 3 are things like taking work off campus and into the community and promotes ongoing and shared access to resources. So those were deemed to be of lower weight than some of the other indicators, but I would really encourage you to reflect on that in your given project and the priorities of your project to say, one of our core goals was getting off of campus and into community, or one of our core goals was strengthening existing relationships. So you can bump up the weighting of those categories or those indicators.
So would it be fair to say that these weights reflect the U of C
Yes.
perspective on the weighting in the context of projects that are being done at U of C?
Yes.
Okay, so we need to keep the lens in mind. That's a reason.
Yes, absolutely. We need to keep the lens in mind.
Yeah, maybe to add to that as well, as this was perhaps a snapshot of the institutional perspectives from when it was first created or first published. And so we have a new strategic plan that may have different emphasis on working with community. It also has more language on open science than it did before. And so something like access here, maybe something that version 2, we could reconsider what the way for that is.
So for me, I like to use the matrix as a discussion point of like, okay, where are we on a scale of 1 to 5? We're gonna talk next about the portrait, and I think the portrait, the story is really the portion that's asked for the Catalyst grants. And I think that's where really a lot of the value from this comes from, this putting those quantitative pieces into context of the story. I guess there's also the engagement numbers.
Yeah. Have a number of different places where you can put engagement numbers, and this would be, again, version 2.0, we probably picked a different word here, but number of stakeholders, who are you listening to, who are you working with, who are you sharing with, and then knowledge users, who are you mobilizing to. And so these numbers, again, can look very different depending on the kinds of projects that you're working with, the scale, the scope, the timelines. But if you're doing this in the planning stage, then perhaps this is where you can also think about what are those numbers, the data that I want to collect in the very early stages, so they're available towards the end when I'm putting a report together. And so lastly, we've got the total weighted impact score. This is going to be automatically calculated. And then here it just gives you a sense of, is it going to be low, moderate, or high? You have an idea of where that range comes from.
I am the first to say that this is meant to be a usable toolkit. It did not go through a rigorous academic vetting and publication process. So I think I would just put that caveat on it. If people have questions about kind of the weighting or what was included, it was meant to, provide a tool where there was no tool. We could definitely dig further, and Pam's work, I think, will contribute to making this an academically validated tool if that's something that's really important to folks in the room. Yeah. I think there's different purposes for different things, and having something that helps you to think about what's important in engaged scholarship is often a step in the right direction, and collecting the data to do that and providing ways to think about quantitative and qualitative data, I think is a strong need. So it depends on what folks' use of it is and their context. Yeah.
How are we for time? Sorry. Oh, it's actually right on. Okay. Good. So here is the other half. This is where you can fill out the narrative portion. And again, the idea is to do this collaborative as much as you can and have conversations with the folks that you're working with to try and capture this information with them. So and it's a few places to fill out. Is this happening at the planning stage or perhaps at the assessment stage? Maybe you want to do it multiple times as a place to check in. And then it starts off with a little bit of instructions, describe the objectives of the knowledge engagement work. So what was your intent at the beginning? What was it that you were hoping to accomplish by engaging in some knowledge engagement work? And then the assessment of impact. And so here's where you can put that score from the matrix if you decide to start with that piece first. And then it will allow some space for reflections on how you came up with that number. And is it what you were expecting? Is there something that you want to do a little bit differently in the future? So you have quite a bit of leeway here to fill that out as it makes sense to you again. This document is too long. The usage guide does go into more detail about things that you might want to consider along the way. But here's where REAP shows up yet again. So in a conversational way, in a narrative way, would you want to explore the reciprocity story, the process that you potentially engaged in with community, and how was that going back and forth and sharing knowledge or sharing resources? The externalities, again, here gives you a chance to do it in more of a narrative function, access, partnership, that strategic context. And engagement here, instead of those specific numbers, it would give you an opportunity to list out some of the people that you're working with and whether there were any learnings along the way. So is there something that they really appreciated about your engagement process, or is there something that perhaps could be done differently in the future? We have some space here for factors affecting outcomes. And here you can think again about the opportunities and challenges that affect the process and the future potential viability of relationships. So this is one that can also be sort of tricky if you're thinking about the timelines that grants exist in, or if you're working with a graduate student and then they're interested in moving on to a different institution or something along those lines. The idea is to be able to, even if the project or that particular work can't continue, to leave the relationship in a good place so that the person or the organization that you're working with feels a good sense of closure, that they understand that that was the objective in the first place, that we were on the same page about timelines. And then also, is there the potential to pick this back up when there are future questions or things that you want to explore again together? And lastly, a place for you to share some supporting information. So if there was a creative output that you did together, is there a plain language summary? Is there a podcast? Is there an infographic? I'm leaning on the same examples a lot today, but there's a whole world of different kinds of outputs that potentially could fit here. And then things like testimonials or relevant materials. So that was a quick run through. We have lots of questions and.
So one of the things we were thinking of as we were preparing this presentation is there's a lot of kind of separate categories listed in that portrait document. Another way you can do this is to use those as prompts to write it into one story, one cohesive story that builds in those components of reciprocity, externalities, access. So some of the prompts that we thought of for a reflection question based on what's in the portrait are things like, who were you working with and in what ways? Like listening to, collaborating, sharing, mobilizing. How did you go about it and why? So what was your methodology, approach, frameworks, and timelines? What resulted? So the examples and the evidence. Which opportunities and challenges affected the process and outcomes, and how will this activity, initiative, or project inform your future work? So that future reflection. And again, this type of story, you want to think about what the use or the purpose of the story is. Is this for your partners to share? Is this for you to share internally for your own reasons? Are there two separate stories that will be created? So there's a narrative that is more useful in the community organization and a narrative that's more useful for you. So really thinking about, again, the purpose and working together with folks on generating something that is useful, usable, and used. I'm not a fan of doing assessment for the sake of assessment. I like to do assessment for the sake of improving something, telling a story, advocating, being accountable for resources, whatever reason. But you want to have something that you can use again to show and celebrate your great work. Yeah.
Yeah, so just a quick wrap up of all the things that we tried to cover today. Recognizing the toolkit is really here to help you plan, to monitor, and to assess the impacts of your partner research projects. The toolkit is adaptable and customizable, so you're not married to what's on the page. You're welcome to change it in a way that makes sense for you and your work. And then lastly, that assessment is best done with partners in community for this particular framework. And that's us. So, if you do want to reach out, you can download the toolkit guide here. I think many of you have been shared that link now. We also have an email address and a website, and you'll notice on the side there's lots of buttons to book consults, and from there you can choose whether you want to talk about research partnerships, about knowledge mobilization, or about the toolkit itself, and put yourself right into our calendars.
Thank you.
That was fantastic. Thank you both for coming. I'm gonna maybe start with a question to take the pressure off everyone else. But so what I really like about it is it gets us to think differently about our work, and even people who maybe don't see themselves as typically having done community engaged work. So I'm wondering if you and how you see a space for the toolkit helping people think about their work for things like a narrative CV, right? As that's getting
so narrative CVs are definitely coming. I don't know if you've all seen this. The tri-agencies are going to be shifting away from the Canadian Commons CV toward a more narrative CV. And part of that is talking about your personal statement, your most significant contributions, your teaching and mentorship contributions. which is in a story format. And a lot of impact assessment, research impact assessment is done in a story format. So the, one of our favorite people is the Director of Research Impact Canada, David Phipps, and his favorite statement is no numbers without stories, no stories without numbers. You know, some qualitative scholars would be like that doesn't fit. But no numbers without stories for sure. So I think the idea of transitioning from kind of like lists of what I've accomplished to that more reflective process, I think the toolkit is really good for reflecting on the values of the work that you're doing. It, for many of us who aren't even doing engaged scholarship, you have to write things like knowledge translation or knowledge mobilization plans, which encourages you to think about the potential users of your work, the potential audiences. So I think that having things like, you know, have I embedded reciprocity in any way? What's access like for the work that I've done? Who is it reaching? Who might I partner with or connect with? Am I collaborating with anyone? I do think those components can be applied even in like basic sciences where you're in the lab working at a bench and you have a strong kind of collaborative network of other scholars, but maybe aren't working in a community organization. So I do think that the principles and approaches to asking reflective questions and then finding evidence to support that and then writing that into a narrative, I think it's a very compelling way. None of you are strangers to doing that either. I think anyone who's applied for a job or a grant has done a lot of narrative writing as well. Yeah.
Thank you. I love that because it kind of takes that focus away from the output. Like I'm gonna write this paper and I'm gonna get it published in an amazing journal. Well, I will qualify the word amazing, but like the best journal I can, and it's gonna help my H index and all of these things, right? But actually think about the outcome, and I think moving people further on.
If there's a question in the room, we have a water bottle that is still branded with knowledge engagement because you're all really good at knowledge engagement as of this webinar or session.
Are you selling them at a discount price?
Yeah, they're free, actually. Only costs you a question. Yeah.
That was excellent. Thanks, and walking through the guide. I guess my question is, are you guys around examples that have come in this toolkit, like at the beginning, in the middle, at the end, and wrap up? Have any examples of stories to say? No?
You might. So that's a great question. And certainly that is sort of some of the questions we're asking people who are engaging in the research component of it. I'm sitting like, I was just realizing I have I'm part of a big team that's just at the beginning stages of a project, but we have 6 sites and they're all community engaged. So as I was sitting there, I'm like, actually, this would be really nice for us to do at different stages, right? As a check-in, almost as a check-in for us to make sure we are working in the way that we want to be working. So I'm hoping to integrate this into more of my projects just broadly, definitely. And I think it's encouraging. It's something that we've just sort of started engaging with the Health Equity Hub. So that was where the impetus to ask for Population Health Catalyst Grant awardees to actually fill it out as well. But if other people wanted to fill it out, I think it's great. And that's kind of the conversations we're trying to start having through the research project.
I think with the research project that you're doing as well with Katrina.
Yeah.
There should be examples of folks who have used it in different ways. We haven't had anyone kind of send us a finished one and say, here's, we want to work through it. So it's a bit of a black box for us in terms of a lot of folks have downloaded it, like hundreds and hundreds of people have downloaded it. But when we've asked for, you know, participants in scholarship, a lot of them are like, oh, I downloaded this and I looked at it. I don't know that I've like overtly used it yet. So we want to hear from folks who do use it. We want to hear back and see how it's going. Oh, there's a question just at the back.
Follow up on that, is that something we could use like a consultation and kind of work through it for a project?
Yeah. So the question was, can you book a consult and walk through the toolkit? And absolutely you can. Yes. Any question here? Yeah.
Thanks, it's really useful. I see a lot of utility in
these sort of three documents. It just depends on, like with most things, as you get more familiar, as you use it, sometimes the utility expands, right? You can easily use, like, people go to the previous slide about those reflective questions. That's a great way for a student to build a poster, right? Or to prepare a presentation around. So there's some really good nuggets here. I'm still a little unclear about, the weighted, the matrix score, right? That weighted impact score. I think on its own, if you go through this exercise, you come up with a score. In isolation, that score may not mean anything to you. So unless you're comparing apples to apples, or, you a couple of projects saying, well, that project was a slightly lower score. I learned from it. I'm here now. Any thoughts on that? Because I feel like sometimes I could be a deterrent because it seems to be leading to an endpoint, and that may not be what you want, right? Or it may not have utility other than it's a number, but so what?
I don't know if this is what I'm supposed to say, but I fully agree with you on that. Part of the movement towards more, holistic research assessment is not trying to distill things down to a single number. So I do agree. I think there's utility in the context that you use it, where you could say, if we did an activity differently, would that change the score? But what does that actually mean from an action standpoint? What is changing? What are we doing differently? What difference does that make to our partners or to the outcomes of our project? That's where I think the greater utility of this is looking at each of those indicators individually and saying, we're not scoring so high on our reciprocity. Is that what we are like? Is that something we can get to a higher level? Is that feasible within this project? Because it's also, depending on who you're working with and what the project is, different situations might have different levels of possible involvement. So it might not be possible to have a fully co-created project in every context. Your partner might not even want that. So I think the numbers should really be used cautiously, but more as a prompt to develop the story. And then the supporting information might be, it might be things like a quote from your partner organization that talks about how you embedded reciprocity in your ways of doing work. Or the numbers might be things like, we put together these collaborative events and this many people attended them and this was their feedback on it. So to me, it's more, I think it's more of a discussion point personally. I don't know if anyone else disagrees with that or agrees with that. I think there are really valuable numbers out there that have to do with the use and uptake of research and engagement. This isn't one that's widely used, I would say. And as you mentioned, the weights can be changed, and it's not like a set scale that everyone is apples to apples being measured against. So I would encourage folks to use the weighted score in the development of those discussions, rather than saying, I managed to tweak the numbers so that I get a super high impact score. But if you can't back that up with the story and then these specific evidence and examples of that, then I don't think it means as much. Yeah. Anything you want to add?
I agree.
So I might be the one researcher in the room. But the reason that I came to this, I manage the Office of Resident Education, a lot of mental health supports for residents and fellows. And one of the things that we've been doing is we've been offering new services. And so what I was hoping, and I guess my question is tied up with this, is that we could use an approach like this to help us measure and tell the story of why we've implemented certain services or started new services, but then be able to evaluate not just the service, but we have 67 programs. So, and they are very different if we're talking family medicine or we're talking for example. And so trying to find a way to pinpoint or target which services best suit which cultures or programs. And so I guess my question is do you think that this is a tool that I could use? Because ultimately, I would like to be able to report on the work that we're doing. And I'd like to be able to do a super search on it, but I also don't want to be writing my ethics to say, well, we did this and now we want to go back and, you know, so I'm trying to set myself up so that I can implement these interventions, evaluate them, and then be able to share whether that's a poster or a paper. I guess my question is, it doesn't sound like this was exactly what it was intended for, but would it be modified?
Okay, my favorite answer is it depends. So one of my favorite really open kind of frameworks on how to design a research evaluation process is called SCOPE. And it really it's just an acronym. S is start with what you value. So really you should start with like what it is you're trying to communicate or trying to assess, like what is important here. C is consider the context. So what is the context you're doing the evaluation in? O then is explore options. So what are the options for the either frameworks, the tools that could be plugged into this, the data that you want to collect? E, which I also love, is probe deeply, meaning probe for potential bias. Are you using metrics appropriately? So it's like reflecting on your process. And then E is evaluate your evaluation. So I think my going back to you would be to say, start with what you value. If part of what you value are these components of engagement, of reciprocity, of externalities, of access, of partnerships, then absolutely this framework makes a lot of sense. The structure itself, I do think you could absolutely, we'd be happy for you to take it and turn it into what you want. If you have, you know, different impact indicators you'd like to plug into that matrix and just use the tool for your very own purposes and write your own kind of reflective questions based on those values that you're trying to assess and into the portrait. I absolutely think that's like a great way to do it as well. This could form part of your assessment. It could be a tool you could work through with some of the users of your programs or people that you're partnering with, or within your kind of steering committee group. So I think there's lots of different ways you could potentially build it in, but I would really just go back and think about, okay, what is this assessing? It is really the four kind of parts and the strategic context, I think. But the four parts of that REAP framework are really about engagement, and we're designed in a community engagement lens. So sit with how well that works with what you're trying to assess and what else might you want to add into it to make it a full story. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. And I think that I think you're right, because part of what I want to be able to measure is our engagement with our communities.
Yeah.
But there are other things and they may not be best suited.
And then how do you get the evidence of your engagement too? Like, are they going to sit with you and do a reflective process, or is it more you need to do like a survey method or a focus group method? So again, it depends on kind of what level of connection you have with your community. So I feel like there may be a lot of, again, it depends in there.
Yeah, I think, I'm trying to remember the name of this, but the formerly campus, now community mental health and well-being strategy at the UC. I want to say a couple of years ago, they developed it'd be called the Toolkit around assessment and evaluations of programs related to mental health. And so I'm going to try and dig it up. And maybe we can, and see if that might have some suggestions for indicators or some guidelines around developing something that could be more specific to the kinds of information that you're hoping to gather to understand what that project. But I think that's part of it. Like, this is quite adaptable and it could be informative, but I imagine there's other maybe toolkits or frameworks that are more specific to programming that could also be kind of a good part.
Thank you. I think we are out of time for today, but there was a ton of interest and really appreciate you coming. And I think more and more people are starting to think differently about research impact. So I imagine it'll be a topic that comes up again and again. And like I said, if you have downloaded the toolkit, you might have got an email that came from the knowledge impact team. asking you to get in touch with someone if you're interested. So now that you've learned a little bit more about it, if you are interested, feel free to reach out. And like I mentioned, it is now part of the reporting for the Pop Health Catalyst grants. Those are open, by the way, with a deadline of June 6th. So that's $15,000 to get a project kind of up and off the ground to catalyze your ideas to apply for more funding. So feel free to take a look at that. That comes out in all of the O'Brien communications as well. And so we'll thank Sarelle and Stephanie again, who are a couple of my favorite people to work with.
I love working with
Yeah.
you.
I thank you again.